one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Here.
Mr. Lindemann?
Here.
Mr. Sabal? Dr. Gomez?
Here.
Mr. Bahrain?
Here. Mr.
Mr.
Sabal.
Bell, here.
Yeah, Mr. Sabal's there. Item D, approval of the minutes. Members of the board, do you have any questions or comments regarding them? I do and the only reason I'm going to bring it up is because it's important. It's on October the 14th in the first paragraph, where it said, I stated that the reason for the meeting tonight is to set the tenor.
Okay.
And the reason it makes a difference is it would appear that we were going to talk about tenures, the parameters of tenure, and we're not going to, so it's important, okay? All right. Any other questions, any comments? Entertain a motion to approve, Mr. Henry.
I move to approve the minutes, October 14th, special meeting, November 5th, regular meeting.
Is there a second?
Second. Second.
By Dr. Gomez, I think. Was that Dr. Gomez?
Dr. Gomez.
Okay.
No, that was
It was
Mario.
Mr. Sabal.
Oh, it was Mario? All right.
Oh, Mario Ramos.
Okay. Mr. Ramos. Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Hello.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Item E. Summary of current events. In the absence of the superintendent, do you have anything?
She's on.
Unless she's on the line.
I'm here.
She's there.
Oh, she's there now?
I am.
Oh, great.
Good
Go
morning.
ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead, Anna.
Here. Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board, and our staffing community. I do have one announcement to make. It's regarding our 21st Century Grant. DUSD would like to formally announce that the district will be applying for the 21st Century Grant for the upcoming school year. We get awarded that so that the schools that we are applying for can receive that funding to have the after-school program. Our distance learning is continuing at all school levels. Again, some being done virtually and some paper packets, and so that is continuing. We will be sending out communication to our parents this week regarding fourth quarter grades and final reports. That's all that I have.
Okay, very good. And that's good news about the 21st Century Grant. I'm confident
Yeah.
we'll get that back. All right.
Right.
Governing, yes.
Are the children still being fed? Is the kitchen still?
Mr. Nunez.
Yes, Mr. Go ahead, Mr. Nunez.
No, that's fine. Yes, our breakfast and lunch programs are still taking place at those 4 sites for all of our students, and I believe the number has significantly increased. Is that correct, Superintendent Samaniego?
Yes, it is over 900. We did see a slight decrease Monday and Tuesday, but numbers are now over 900.
Very good. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Anybody else, governing board members, you have any reports, questions? We'll move to the business office report, Mr. Soto.
Good morning, Mr. President. Again, it's a cash report that you have in your packets. We're still okay. This is supposed to be for the month of March. We still have some balance on our M&O and in capital and Title I, which is good for our potential carryover. I don't know if you have any specific questions about that.
Is that it?
And then we have the travel report, and it's, as you can see, minimum since everything, all of the sites are closed and stuff, and all of the conferences around the state are canceled, so there's not a lot of travel. It's mainly just to pick up supplies and back and forth, but nothing major.
Okay, then, as far as the budget is concerned, understandably, we'll get into more details regarding that later on in the meeting.
Correct.
enrollment report, Mr. Nunez.
Sure. As was shared by the New Student Center, we currently have approximately 4,079 students enrolled. And in our conversations in leadership, myself with the superintendent and our enrollment department, we're looking at new approaches to possibly continue the open enrollment, looking at how we're outreaching to families and so forth, and talking about the enrollment center, the New Student Center being open or made available, especially because there is still the way that it was redesigned with some the windows and so forth, that would still allow for our visitors to take place and to enroll students as regularly situated. So we'll be communicating some enrollment hours and how we're going to share that information out with our families too.
Okay, very good. Any questions or comments regarding the enrollment?
I did
Yes,
have
Mr. Lindeman.
one. Concerning the new student center, since that's been closed, how are you outreaching the parents and stuff to make sure that they make their utility bills and all that stuff, and so they'll be enrolled?
So currently, that's what we were just discussing earlier last week about what type of approach that we're going to do. We're talking about how we're going to communicate that out with our families. Currently, we're doing a lot of outreach through our parent liaisons as well. We just communicated something out with them. And so we're trying to do as much as we can to make sure that all of our parents know that enrollment will still be taking place.
Is it on the website?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
If I may add, good morning, board. I believe what we discussed is that New Student Center would start opening up some partial hours starting next week. Correct, Mr. Nunez? To allow for, obviously, any new students and new families to begin the enrollment process, and also to continue doing the annual registration and residency confirmation.
Yes, that's correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, item 2, consent agenda items. A, approval of the following consent agenda items, payroll and expense vouchers and reports. And I'll enumerate them, expense vouchers 1 through 3. I won't go through the numbers, but as presented, entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the expense vouchers.
Okay, have it, Mr. Lindeman made the motion here, and who was that?
Mr. Ramos.
Ramos?
Okay,
That was me.
Mr.
okay,
Ramos?
second by him. All right, roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bering?
Yes, item 3, A, discussion action on the approval of certified hires, Mr. Nunez.
Yes, as presented, we have an English teacher for the Douglas High School as well as a social studies teacher for Douglas High School.
All right, you want to list the names?
Nubia Elias will be moving she's been at Douglas High School serving in the capacity as a parent liaison, so she will be moving into an English teacher. And Mr. Albarracin is a new social studies teacher to Douglas High School.
Nubia Elias went from parent liaison to a high school English teacher?
And formerly, before that, she was already serving in the capacity as an English teacher as well.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just even the same thing. Mr. Albarracin was recruited at one of our job fairs, so recruitment and retention practices are still taking place despite the new closures and so forth, but we're still having to employ our new teachers.
All right, entertain a motion to approve by Mr.
I'll move to approve.
Mr. Lindeman. Is there a second?
Second. Second.
That's Mr.
Okay.
Ramos, I believe. Ramos?
Yes.
Okay, have a motion on the floor. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bering?
Yes. Item B, discussion action on the approval of certified resignations. Mr. Nunez.
As presented, we have 4 staff members, certified staff members, that are resigning from their current positions: a social studies teacher at Douglas High School, our Spanish teacher at Douglas High School, our school counselor at Paul Huber Middle School, and our ESS teacher at Douglas High School.
Okay, and that's all at the end of the year, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, entertain a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
By Mr. Lindeman, second?
Second.
Who was,
Second.
Mr. Sabal.
Mr. Sabal? All right. It's hard to tell. Board members, if you could identify yourself as an example, say Dr. Gomez, whatever, so that way Alma will know who it is, if you would do that, please. So I think it was, was that Mr.?
Sabal.
It was Sabal, the second on that one. Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. Item C, discussion action on the approval of board contributions for health benefits for school year 2020-21. Mr. Soto.
We had our meetings about benefits, and like I reported last time, the health insurance is going to go up 6%. And there was a slight decrease on dental and vision. I think we're going to switch companies for dental. No, for visions. Well, for both, I guess. We're going to go with Delta Dental. That it was presented us with a 16% reduction, and VSP, which is a vision provider, with a 12% decrease. So that's a good thing for our employees that are going to see a slightly decrease on those benefits. And then again, the recommendation from this administration is to keep covering 100% the health insurance for our employees. Again, the recommendation this year, we're going from a $605 per month contribution per employee. We're recommending going to $640. By doing that, just a little bit of information. Most of our employees elect to be on the better plan, which is they have to come out of pocket for that to pay for that. But by doing the $640 board contribution, the out of pocket for them for single employee will only be less than $3. So I mean it's not a big increase, but again we were trying to make it not as hard for the employees to come out with this monies for health insurance. So again, the recommendation is to be $640 a month per employee, which annually will be $7,680 per employee. Any questions?
Just quickly, the percentage of certified staff that actually are participating in the insurance program, just an estimate.
Ooh, I can tell you that we have roughly 385 employees total that participated with our benefits, with our insurance, and I think it's a pretty good number. Saying that we have 450 employees total. Some all of the other employees elect to get their spouses or some other kind of insurance that they have at home or other places of work. I couldn't tell you specifically how many certified people we have on that list. I honestly don't know, but it's probably
There's
60 to
some
70%. Yeah.
that elect not to take it, correct?
Yes, correct.
And then just for informational purposes, the fact that the district provides the one basic one and it costs them, as you said, less than $3, I think is really significant. But that also lends itself to the discussion regarding what we're going to be talking about later, because that's a significant amount of money paid by the district.
Correct.
Towards that, in order for the board to enable them to do that. So it's important to note, because we're going to be discussing salaries later on in the meeting, and that's a pretty good portion of it, an expense.
Correct.
In the salary. Okay. Any
Mr.
questions?
Bahrain, Mr. Bahrain?
Yes.
May I add something? This is Superintendent Samanolo. I just want to reiterate the total amount by this increase that will be paid out of our M&O budget is $2,956,800 for approximately 385 employees. So the increase or the difference that is going to come out of our budget is $198,000 from what we paid in 2020. So that is quite a bit of an amount, but it is the intent of this leadership and administration to continue providing full coverage for the individual employee.
Okay, there seems to be some, a little bit of disagreement here.
No, it's just a clarification.
A clarification.
That's a total for all
Okay.
employees. Keep in mind that we have employees that are being paid out of grants and being paid out of different funds. That's the total, but I will say 80 to 85% of that amount will be coming out of M&O, but not the total 2.9 million.
You know, board members,
Okay.
given all the circumstances, and especially all of the national concerns and issues regarding health care, I think that is a very significant benefit that we provide our employees. All right, we need a motion on the floor. So, Mr. Lindeman, would you
I move to approve.
have a motion by Mr. Lindeman? Can I get a second?
Second.
By Dr. Gomez, I think.
Yes.
Is that Dr.
Now, that's Mr. Sabal.
That was Mr. Sabal.
Sabal?
Okay.
Okay, all right. Then, motion by Lindeman, second by Sabal. Any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Brain,
Yes, Dr. Gomez. Is that-
Dr. Gomez, yes. So the motion is to approve this benefit, is that correct?
Correct. The expenditure.
The board
for it.
contribution, correct.
The increase.
Okay, yes, okay.
All right, okay. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Burring?
Yes. Item D, discussion action on the approval of salary increase for all Douglas Unified School District employees for school year 2020-2021. And this discussion is going to be all-encompassing when we get to the finality of the discussion with the other two items, which would be B and B and C. We, at the last board meeting, had discussed, based on the support and philosophy of the board for a long period of time now regarding salaries, and wanting to do the best we could for our staff. At one of the previous board meetings, it was discussed that we were going to do 6 and 3, and then at that board meeting, the question was asked, can you do 7 and 4? And the board, we met last week, and the administration came back and said they could do 7 and 4. The question was specifically asked, what about the grant monies? And I think it's important to be aware that that the grants pay a significant amount of salaries in the school district. And if those monies aren't forthcoming, and especially in the situation with the federal grants and as all of the expenditures being made at the federal level, that it was important to note what the possibility and what the climate looked like for those grants and that those monies forthcoming. So here we are today, and we were ready as a board last week, and I think it was good that we had said at that time that we would just want to let it sink in after the discussion that we had last week, and that today would be the day that we would adopt those salaries. Before I make the further comment regarding where we are regarding that, it's also important to note that when we talk teacher salaries, that the majority of the money is state funded, and especially within the last 4 years with the initiative that was undertaken by the Education Association in the state, and they ended up getting a commitment from the state for 20%. We're at the end of that. We wanted to go more than what that last year was going to be, and I think that's what we were going to do. But it's important to note that the majority and the lion's share of salaries for people in the school district comes from the state. The district seldom participates or contributes anything from the M&O. That's why over the years I've said that, and Mr. Soto has known, and the board has agreed that we needed to dip into our M&O if we could, and add a little bit more to what was being funded by the state. Administrators' salaries in the district are paid by the district, by the M&O budget. Keep in mind that when the state mandates those funds that they're specifically for instruction. They're for classroom teachers. Administrators aren't mentioned at all. The reason that's important is because whatever we do for the administrators has to be something that is funded by the M&O budget. Now, having said all of that, if the grant money is not forthcoming, or is there some question, or there's a little bit of hesitance on the availability of monies and whether they're going to be granted or funded fully as they have been in the past, or that there will be more money forthcoming, is of utmost importance. Here's where we are today. Given the week we had from the last time we met, we now know that that the question of the grants is tenuous now, and the fact that we've been notified, and I'm going to turn it over to the two experts here in a minute, but we've been notified that some of that grant money may not be forthcoming. Why is that important? It's important because if we were to vote today and give the 7 and 4, and the grants couldn't fund that money, and we were committed to giving all of our staff that increase, guess who would have to pick up the difference that the grants didn't fund? That would be the M&O budget, and that would disseminate our budget. So we always look to a good carryover for obvious reasons, but we discussed with Mr. Soto last week the carryover, and he was comfortable about what it was going to be, given the fact that we thought we'd be funded by the state, of course, and by the grants that I just mentioned. But if the federal government and the grants are not forthcoming, and we were to pass the 7-4 today, we would be in trouble. And so I want to take the time, and we're going to take all the time that we need to have Mrs. Cox, who is the Director of Grants. I want her to give us an overview of what's happened since that last meeting and why we're looking at something today that may not be possible for us to do. That's not saying that we can't do it later, a little bit later down the road. We're still looking at the issuance of contracts, but we need to be vigilant and totally aware of where the money's coming from. We can't vote on something that we can't fund. So Denise, if you don't mind giving us kind of an overview of what you know and why there's a concern regarding the grants, and then when we get when she's done, then I'm going to call on Mrs. Walker, the lady that wears all the different hats in the district, and she's going to, and very efficiently, by the way, she's going to give us an overview on her department and her funding. So Denise, let me sit back and listen, and if you please, it's going to be very important, so we need to listen carefully.
So good morning, Mr. President, board members. I would like to give you, like Mr. Brain has mentioned, some updates on the grants and what's happened. So typically, when we get preliminary allocations, which is what we have right now, in order to start writing the grants, they give us a percentage. So between 80 to 90% of what our final allocation will be. So at this point, all we can see, and when I say we, I'm speaking of Katie and myself, is preliminary allocations, not based on the full funding. So based on that, all of our grants have a decrease, different percentages. So what I want to talk to you about right now are the two grants that have teacher salaries tied to them, because that's going to be critical. So Title I, which is our biggest grant, right now we're looking at about an 8% reduction, okay? So I'm expecting that come July 1st, we'll get the full allocation, at least the same allocation we received last year, if not a little more. Title I funds teacher salaries at every single site, a percentage. It funds classified staff, so IAs. It also funds parent liaisons, coaches, preschool teachers. So there's a wide variety of things that the Title I funds. It also funds tutoring, it funds summer school. So right now with an 8% cut in Title I, I'm not too concerned about Title I, just to be transparent about that. I think we'll be okay. The other grant that's going to be impacted right now is the SEI. It's the Structured English Immersion class or salaries. So we're funded sometimes from SEI and sometimes we're not. It is based on our weighted B count that goes directly into the M&O budget. Okay, so I don't know what that is. I don't have inclination of what's done with that. Last year, we were fortunate to fund 9.6% or 9.6 salaries.
Right.
However, the law changed last year with SEI, with Title III. Before, we used to have the 4-hour program, so they reduced it to 120 minutes, a 2-hour program for certain students. The high school and the middle schools, if they have pre-emergent, emergent basic students, they have to have a 4-hour block. So what SEI is doing now, they've changed the way we write the grant. Before, they would give us spreadsheets, incremental costs. Now this year we have to apply for it. So there isn't a budget that I can tell you that we're losing 50% of a grant or 90% of a grant. There is no money tied to it. What I have to do right now is I have to write the grant. I have to put in the salaries that we would like paid. What SEI is going to do is that they're going to look at our weighted B count in terms of, do you need this funding? Now, in years previous, we could fund a full salary. We can no longer do that. SEI is now telling us it's only based on the amount of time a teacher is with an SEI student or in that ELL or ELD classroom. So right now, it's a 2-hour block. So we can only apply for 2 hours of a teacher's salary. So SEI is changing a little bit. The reason I'm concerned about SEI is because if we don't get funded, then those teachers that were funded out of SEI will now have to move into the M&O budget. And that, with a 7% raise, is going to be a huge cost to the district. We won't know if we're funded until July 1st. So we're we're writing our grants right now. Title I, I'm not concerned about. SEI, I'm a little concerned about that one.
Let me ask you, you mentioned Title I, but you also have Title II and III. You don't have any salaries in those other titles except one other one, right? You have.
So in Title II, we have the new teacher induction coach salary. In Title III, we have the ELD coaches' salaries in those. Okay. So in Title III, there is a reduction. As of right now, there is a reduction in Title III. But they haven't, again, given us our full allocation. And sometimes there are students that aren't factored in until after July 1st. So like the private school students aren't put into the grant until after July 1st. Title IV, there are no salaries in Title IV. We have rural and low income. There are no salaries in rural and low income. Migrant migrant So migrant is a little bit different. There are no teacher salaries in migrant, but there are the migrant liaison is funded out of that. And then we have a student advocate and recruiter. So migrant works a little bit different. Migrant is based on the number of students we have in the program. Okay, so the migratory students are the ones who are funded into the migrant application, and we are decreasing our numbers in terms of migrant students. So we're actively recruiting, but the way that we are able to recruit and retain the migrant students has changed. And I think that's all we have.
So the concern is, so the board understands, is SEI, and they've changed the way that they're funding now. That the percentage of actual instruction time has to correspond with the amount of money that they're going to pay them. Correct?
Yes.
So it's going to be a reduction there from last year. Correct?
Yes.
So that means that if we move forward with our proposal, that the money that is not funded because of the reduction and now the more stringent requirement that they be more instruction time would fall on the M&O budget,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
All right, and then again, and I know I'm going to repeat myself, but we're always looking at the carryover, and the more that diminishes and carries away, then this board has to look at their fiscal responsibility and exactly what the finances of the school district are.
Because
So,
potentially, Mr. Brain, it's about a $450,000.
I was going to ask that.
It's in funding. It's about $450,000 that would then have to go into M&O, not including the 7% raise.
Okay, so is that the last word on SCI, or is there a chance that there could be some change? But is that the final word on that?
That's the final word, and we won't know whether we will receive the funding until after July 1st.
Okay, so it would have been wonderful if we'd have had this information before, and there would have been, but I didn't think the information was available at that time. But, so what you're saying is, what is very, very important to the board in this decision is that if we were to go with whatever we voted on today, and we would be looking at an additional $450,000 in the M&O budget, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to, board members, the reason I wanted Mrs. Cox to make that presentation is so that you could see the magnitude of the impact that would have on us if we were to move. But we'll come up with some final discussion here later on some proposals. So Denise, you're gonna be around for a while just in case there are more questions?
Yes, I will be here.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions of Mrs. Cox before she sits down?
This is Sabal. When was this notified? When were we notified of this mistake?
No, it wasn't, Mr. Sabal, it wasn't a mistake. There's no mistake, so let's not get that out there and have a misconception. It's the way the government operates, and it's the funding that they also get. And keep in mind that the way the federal government is now, with all of the money they're spending, they're in some dire straits as well. But they change rules and procedures and requirements within these grants from time to time. And we were not made aware of it until that full funding and that change in funding may not come until recently.
And they're looking at the weighted B count first. So that's something that we get every year based on the amount of ELL students we have. So it's going to, what we're asking for in terms of grant is the offset of what the weighted B count will afford us. So they're going to look at weighted B count first and then see if we need additional salaries.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Yeah, let's be clear, there was no mistake.
Mr. Beret?
Yes. Yes, Ms.
Mr.
Summit.
Beret, and let me answer what Mr. Sabal, I think what Mr. Sabal is asking is when did we receive this information?
No.
Obviously, this came late in the week, way after we had our work study session. And so since I was informed, we've been discussing it, looking at it extensively. Had we had this information before, probably would have recommended something differently during the work study session.
Thank you, Ms. Samaniego.
All right, good. Mrs. Walker.
Mr. Brain, this is Dr. Gomez.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead, doctor.
What does SDI mean?
It's the structured English immersion. That's for the.
English learners.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. President, this is Mario.
Yes.
I just have a question for clarification here. In order to cover these amount of money, I believe I heard that in the reduction of hours that were going to be usually paid out, we would have to pay $150,000 out of the M&O.
$450.
Is that correct?
$450.
This is what meant.
Pardon?
Funding at all.
Go ahead. You want to answer it?
Well, the 450 would be if we don't get any funding
Right.
for that grant at all.
Right.
Yeah.
But we are applying for the grant.
Right. So we're applying. There's still a possibility. My just briefly thinking is if the hours were reduced by half, I'm hoping that at least we get half of that allocation. If it's 225, 250,000, that will help a lot. But again, it's still in the air. We don't know.
But, if this is Denise again, so we do have an increase in our ELL
Right.
population. So we have about 954 ELL students in the district, including Loretto, because we're funded for Loretto also. So this doesn't mean that we're not going to get SEI funding. We just don't know at this
How
point
much?
whether we will or not, or how
Oh,
much.
how much?
Okay.
Right, so at the end of the day, after we hear these presentations, then with all the information we've gotten, then we'll decide where we go from here, but we'll wait till we hear from Katie as well.
Mr. President, if I have one question before Mr. Walker. Mrs. Cox, am I correct in assuming that the SEI funding comes from the state?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay, I was confused, somebody was saying federal and somebody was saying, but it's the
Title I is
state.
federal.
Yes,
And
they're,
it's
they're
it's
federal.
the state that changed the law from 4-hour block to 2 hours.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was the state.
okay, thank you.
Now, Katie.
Good morning. So, I'm going to talk about the IDEA Basic and Preschool Grant. It's a consolidated grant. We get a portion that goes to the general ESS population, and then we have a small amount of monies allocated to preschool. So, based on last year's allocation to the allocation I received for the upcoming school year, I saw a 30% reduction in funds. My IDEA Basic, the district's IDEA Basic grant funds 12 certified and 2 classified staff salaries. So based on a 30% reduction, my concern is that that's a matter of moving staff out of IDEA Basic and over to the M&O budget. As far as preschool, a portion of a teacher's salary is funded out of a preschool, but in that allocation, there was a 50% reduction currently. So again, as Mrs. Cox stated, we do expect to see an increase in funding, but however, given what we have currently, it's a matter of not just being able to cover those salary increases, but actually having to move people out of the IDE grant and over to the M&O side in order to fund their salaries for the upcoming school year.
So for the benefit of the board, what the acronym is Disabilities Act, but why don't you tell them what it's special, it's
It's for the special education.
Right, board member, just so you know. So how much would you be talking about that if that money wasn't forthcoming, that would have to be picked up by the M&O?
237,000.
200 and what?
237,000 for the IDA basic, and then 5,500 for preschool.
One of your problems now is the fact that you can't get any information out of them, right? They're not available to answer any questions or anything.
No, I
correct?
did put in a phone call trying to get some information, but again, they're working from home, so it's kind of hit and miss. When we log into, we have like a platform we log into, and that's where all the communication is done. There's no information on allocations right now.
Okay, members of the board, do you have any questions for Katie Walker? Thanks, Katie.
This is Dr. Gomez. Did she say that she was going to lose 32%?
It's a approximately a 30% reduction from last year's allocation to this year's allocation.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Let me, I want to make sure that everybody understands that our commitment as a board and administration is still to do what we have discussed. And we want to make sure we can do that. And again, we always have to proceed cautiously, because if we were to commit ourselves today to something that we weren't absolutely sure of, and that being the funding, then we could devastate that M&O budget. Time might give us a little bit of an opportunity to see where we will be, maybe say in a week. Hopefully, Mrs. Walker's contacts at the State Department will answer the phone. They might be able to give her some idea about how much the funding is going to be. But the very uncomfortable position right now is that she has no idea what's going to be forthcoming. Mrs. Cox is pretty sure, as always is a situation with Title I, that the monies will be forthcoming, but she is also not that positive about it at this point. We do know, you do know that you'll get approximately 90%, right? And you could even get more, but we want to make sure. So I think, summing it all up, members of the board, that our commitment is still there. And I'm going to make a recommendation that we table this item as well as the following two, which deal with the contracts, because we can't issue contracts of the principals and staff if we don't know what the salaries are going to be. But please feel confident that this is not in any way a major setback. It might set us back a little bit, but we are definitely going to come back. I'm going to ask the board to table this today and to come back Tuesday for a special meeting. And it'll be again to adopt the salaries, and hopefully Mrs. Cox and Mrs. Walker will have much better information than they have now. And then even if some of those aren't fully funded, then we'll see what Mr. Soto can do with the M&O budget, and that's of utmost importance to us as board members to know exactly how it's going to impact that budget and how much money he's going to have as a cushion at the end of the year, which is very important. So, members of the board, that's a lot of information, but I do want to get your feedback on that before I'm going to ask you to table it, but before I do, is there any discussion regarding any of the information given today and or any questions regarding the budget?
Yes, Mr. President, this is Mario.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
my concerns were that the amount of monies that we would have to come out of the M&O, as you stated, would devastate our M&O budget. And also the concern is the fact that all this money that we may have to pay out, is that going to hinder being able to supply all the school classrooms with the supplies that they need at the end of for the entire year?
Well,
So tabling this would be a good move in to be able to get all the information that we have before we make a decision.
That's a good comment and a good question, and I'm going to react to that quickly. When we asked Mr. Soto and the administration if they can do this, I think that the conversation did include we're not going to deprive the instructional responsibilities that we have towards our students or our staff or supplies and those kinds of things. So we ensured, and I'm glad you brought that up, because whatever they recommend, they're going to certainly take that into account before they make any recommendation. Any other board member?
Mr. Bray?
Yes, Mr. Bray.
Mr. Bray? Oh,
Yes. Dr. Ed first. Go ahead, Dr. Ed.
No,
Okay. I might be getting ahead of myself, but if we table this salary increases, wouldn't we also have to table item F?
Yes.
Ian,
I think I said that, didn't I? I said that
Yes.
earlier, that they would all be tabled, all of those items.
Okay, fine.
Mr. Bray, I so move to table.
Let me, I
Mr.
think,
Bray, may
I want to
add
hear,
something?
I want to hear from Mrs.
Superintendent.
Samaniego first. Go ahead, Anna.
I just want to make one point, and I want to ensure, because I know by tabling, some of our staff may be feeling uncomfortable, thinking I may not possibly get a contract or that. So I want to just make sure and ease everybody by doing the tabling. By tabling these agenda items is only allowing us to gather more information, giving us a week. But as soon as we're going to bring it back on Tuesday, but I don't want anybody to worry about not getting a contract in May. As soon as this gets approved by our governing board, whether it be the 7 and the 4 or the lesser amount, we are going to, our HR department is going to get actively engaged in getting those contracts out as soon as possible. So I don't want anybody to worry about not getting a contract for next year.
I'll do it.
Okay, very good. And then I want to also reassure again that we're still committed to doing the 7 and the 4. And that's what we want them to look at. And of course, all of these people are going to put their heads together. They're going to coordinate their efforts, and they're going to come back next Tuesday. Hopefully, they'll have more information and let the board know what they can do. And hopefully, we'll be at that number. And if we're not there, we'll do the best. We'll continue to do the best we can, because I know that's what the board wants to do. All right, before I entertain a motion to table, do we have any more discussion or anything else that you want to add, Mr. Soto?
Mr.
Denise, do you want to add anything else?
Mr. Brain, I made the motion.
But we weren't ready for the motion yet, Mr. Sabal. I'll entertain it when we get there. I want to make sure that all of the information is on the table
Okay.
before we do that. Katie, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to state that we did see.
It's got to, so that they can hear you.
I just wanted to state that we did see an increase in our ESS population, so I do expect in the end for our numbers to increase, our amount
Funding.
allocated to increase.
Yeah, and of course, your dealings with them is very difficult because they're extremely affected by this whole thing that's going on in the state, and they're all working from home. All right, now, Mr. Sabal, I'll entertain a motion to table.
I so moved.
By Mr. Sabal?
Items D, E, and F, second.
Okay.
Mario.
Yeah, I was going to clarify that. Yeah, and yeah, let me do it before we get the second. I want to make sure that we understand, as I had said earlier, it's going to be all three of those items because they're all conclusive. So it would be items D, E, and F. And so if I'll get a second from Dr. Gomez on that?
No, that was Mario.
That was Mario.
Oh, Mario, okay, that's, okay, we'll get that from Mario. And so we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Be patient with us. We're going to do the best we can. We certainly don't want to send a message that it's gloom and doom, because it's not. That there will be something forthcoming. But we just want to make sure that we know and we're assured of what we're doing responsibly here. So Denise, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. Katie, thank you guys, especially under the circumstances. And so we have a motion on the floor. Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Brain?
Yes, and tentatively, we're going to meet next Tuesday, correct, Ms. Samaniego?
Yes, sir, at 10 a.m.
Okay, next Tuesday at 10. All right. Yes. All right, we'll move on. Thank you very much, you guys, for being here, really. Appreciate it. We're moving now to discussion items, requests for future items. I think we'll skip that for right now. I don't think there's any call for that. And then the announcement would be the next regular board meeting, May the 5th, 2020 at 10. That's the next
Mr.
regular.
Barrain?
Can we change
Yes,
that,
Hannah.
please?
Yes,
Mr. Brain?
yes.
If I may, our regular board meeting is scheduled for May 5th, but our Mr. Soto has to, our business department, we have
Budget.
to do a budget revision. And in order to be able to do that and get the forms from the state, they won't have that ready by May 5th. So what I'm asking is if the board could reconsider and setting our May board meeting for May 12th.
That's a very good idea. Members of the board, do you have any objection to that?
No.
No.
Okay,
No.
all right.
Thank you.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so the next regular board meeting's May 12th at 10 a.m. Thanks for that, Anna.
Okay, and Mr. Barrain, if I may, just one more announcement. I am going to be meeting with Douglas High School administration and probably a committee to start coming up with a graduation plan. My goal is to have 3 options for graduation, which would allow kids to receive their diploma under the circumstances. And so I have that meeting on Friday. We should have at least 3 options to present for, maybe I can announce it at our special meeting next week if we're ready.
Okay, good. That's good. I think I speak on behalf of all the board. I think that's great that you're considering something for those students.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Item 6, executive session. The governing board may vote to go into executive session to consider the parent's appeal to a recommendation of the hearing officer concerning the long-term suspension of student A. Pursuant to ARS-15-843A, the board can discuss and vote on the recommendation of the hearing officer in executive session. So I'll entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Move to go into executive.
By Mr. Lindeman. Second,
Second, Mario.
Mario, thank you. Second by Mr. Ramos. Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindemann?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Berry?
Yes. So we'll be going executive session.
Okay.
That's
You know, the good thing is she's learning very, very well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hate to see if you weren't there in presence and by phone only. Then we'd really be in trouble, Ray.
Okay, back in open session. Item number 8, discussion action on recommendation of termination with cause of employment of Ms. Antoinette de la Torre, instructional aide at Ferris. Mr. Lindeman.
I move to accept the recommendation for the Human Resources.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Ramos.
Ramos. Who was before
Mr.
Ramos?
Sabal.
Sabal, he doesn't. Okay, any discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes. If there's nothing else to come before the board, entertain a motion to adjourn
Move to adjourn.
So moved.
by Mr. Lindeman,
Mr. Ramos?
and Mr. Ramos seconded. Roll call.
Yes.
Mr. Ramos?
Yes.
Mr. Lindeman?
Yes.
Mr. Sabal?
Yes.
Dr. Gomez?
Yes.
Mr. Bahrain?
Yes.